Can you? Yeah, we have one. We're one short. If you've been looking at the program, you'll notice that Kenny Champagne is not here. He unfortunately had to call in sick. He's not feeling well today. So we wish he could be here, but unfortunately he couldn't. However, we are privileged to have with us three musical instrument builders for this portion of the program, which is entitled A Band of Builders. I like that title because we could make a band out of these three individuals. I'm going to very briefly introduce these folks and then let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So immediately to my left, we have accordion maker Randy Falcone. Whom you may have heard of. To Randy's left, we have Joel Pouts, who is a violin fiddle maker. And to his left, we have Jay Steiner, who dresses quite nicely. He actually works here at Vermilionville as the blacksmith and is a triangle maker. So I thought I have a few prepared questions, but what I really hope this turns into is a conversation. I myself am no instrument maker, although I do own a few different instruments and attempt to play them. These people up here know a lot more about the subject than I ever will, so I'm going to pick their brains a little bit, and then we'll open up for audience questions as well. But what I wanted to do was to allow them some time, each of them, to explain a little bit about who they are, where they're from, and in particular how they became instrument makers. So we can begin with whomever wants to start. We're going to have to share microphones, so whoever would like to begin. Keep on passing it down.
There we go. All right. Yes, so I'll get started. I started here at Vermilionville 6 years ago. Just last month was my 6-year anniversary. Started here as a tour guide, and I had recently left teaching. Decided to do a little early retirement there. Came back to jump in the tourism game, and they didn't have a blacksmith at the time. I went back there. We had a fella here who was working who would go back there and make little spoon rings and stuff, and he taught me how to set a fire in the forge, not set the forge on fire. And I started kind of goofing around back there, working on little rings and this and that. And Dr. Jeremy came back there and he said, it looks the part. So I started working back there, and about a year later started making triangles. The first few ones, the first one I made, I actually gave to Ashley Michaud at a Soul Creole show. And it was the first time I got to see someone play something I made at a show, and that I kind of decided then that would be a cool thing to do. I was never good at making music, but I could make things that make music, and so that's where it really started.
So I'm Joel Pouts, and Jay and I are from Lafayette. From training on, like him, I got interested in fiddle making partly through an interest of woodworking and growing up having violin lessons. I called up some people who do it and run shops and asked how you get into this, and they're like, you can't do this unless you go to one of the schools for violin making, and the U.S. is very lucky to have three, Boston, Chicago, and Salt Lake City. And before I was, like most people don't even want you in their shop without this school training. So I want to point out that Anya Burgess was very kind, and she let me go to her shop a couple times a month, and every 2 weeks or 1 week, and I got to build a scroll, and I was totally unprepared, and it looked awful, and that was my first entry into fiddle making. So I did eventually attend the full-time program in Boston, and got jobs in different shops since, and finally moved back home in 2014.
If someone would have told me when I was 14, listening to my 8-track tape of the Beatles, Dave Clark 5, Rolling Stones, that I would make accordions, I'd say they were crazy. It wasn't until I was 20 years old that I realized I did have some real music in my family. My sister is a piano teacher. My idea of music was still rock and roll until I bought my first accordion. I couldn't believe what the little instrument would do. Go to jam sessions every Saturday morning in Crowley at Mr. Lawrence Shine Mouton, who made the accordion for me, one of the premier accordion makers. About 2 or 3 years later, 1973, I said, Shine, they called him Shine. I said, Shine, I'd like to make an accordion. He started laughing. I said, I just want to make one. He said, one at a time. Well, lo and behold, after that first accordion, I was hooked. And it all began there. And I was a school teacher at the time and did that on the side. There were no internet to be able to try to peddle my work every Friday and Saturday night. I'd go to the clubs and try to let people play the accordion. And at that time, we were probably 6 or 7 accordion makers. And now, from what I understand, there's at least, Larry, how many, 40, 50? From Texas to Louisiana. And they all do a great job. And I can't believe I've been doing this 44 years.
So one of the questions I had written down, some of you have already touched upon. That first instrument that you made, I know Jay said that you gave it to Ashley Michaud, and you talked about your first one in 1973. Joel, you want to tell us about your first instrument?
My first violin. So when you go to a violin making school, you start making handles for your knives, at least I did, and they expect you to start on a violin soon after, and it's modeled after Stradivarius because his work is very well studied, it's very clear, and it's what most fiddle makers base their work on. And when I finished my first instrument, I told my teacher, if this was a horse, I'd shoot it. And Anya can vouch for this, I've kept my work very close to myself. It's very hard to find an original because it's really, to me, and most people in the field, it's really daunting. There's still Stradivarius violins out there. You can encounter them. So you're not just competing against people that are current makers. It's like the people who are, it would be like artists today competing against Da Vinci or Michelangelo as well. In a way they are too, as well, I guess. Sorry.
That's interesting to me because it makes me wonder if there are the Stradivarius of triangles, or is there a Stradivarius of the accordion? These people who you model your work on. Do either of you have?
So when I started, I brought in, just to show, one of my early ones that I made. I'm gonna have to get this without dropping. 1 second. So when I first started making them, there goes the hat. I kind of did the rounded corners. I was using the anvil that I had and working with it like that. And then a friend of mine let me kind of check out a Don Montese, let me check out a Larry Miller triangle, and just kind of looking at them and feeling them and getting the idea of it, I started doing the more typical angles like that. And I did notice a difference in sound and quality, and I still do some like this because, might as well. But the cool thing about making triangles is that, there's people still making them, and there's people who of course, you have the two main fellows I mentioned, who theirs are held in such high regard by local musicians here. So it's not so much of a competition, I feel, whereas it's just kind of like a bar that you kind of strive for, and even if you never hit it, at least you tried. So, and if I fall just a few inches short of it one day, that'll be farther than I ever thought I would get. So.
Mr. Falcone, was there an accordion maker who when you were starting out, that you tried to model yourself after, or whose accordions you hope to one day reach that level?
Well, all of these accordions that we play originally came from Germany and were available at Mervyn Kahn, for sure, in Rain until World War II for various reasons. And that one thing I need to tell you is that the stops on an accordion make this part of a diatonic accordion. And also, the proper name for this type of accordion is not an accordion, it's a melodeon. But you tell Aldous Roger that 60 years he's been playing a melodeon, he'd probably say, man, shy, what that is. But by proper definition, and the reason I know that is because in 1992, I received a U.S. patent on this accordion that plays in 2 keys instead of 1, thanks to USL at the time, the Productivity Center in the state of Louisiana, who funded the project. And it wasn't a perfect accordion, but it did work. I've had several good musicians that are still playing it. Since then, I've kind of upgraded this melodeon. In fact, my patent reads dual-pitched melodeon. A patent is good for 17 years, and it's been over now for about 11 years. And there were some other accordion makers that said when the patent is over that they would make the accordion. What's fine with me, I can't stop them. Well, it's been 11 years, and I haven't seen one surface yet. It's very, very, very difficult, very time-consuming, aggravating, and I thank my wife, Connie, for putting up with me all this time. I don't make the double accordions anymore as of the 1st of this year. I love to make the 4 stops. It's just too much time, effort, and for the money, people don't want to pay what it's worth. The time is just really something else. I have upgraded to a certain extent. This particular melodeon looks like a regular dual-pitched melodeon or double accordion, but this one actually plays in 3 keys, and it works. Wayne Toops played 2 concerts with it. So did High Performance Band with Jamie Beard and Jason Basro. I don't know if you know these people. They're all my customers. So it is quite different. And, well, that's all I can say.
Well, you mentioned the amount of time. How long does it typically take for each of you, I guess, to make an instrument? I know it's going to vary, so we can start with Mr. Falcone.
Well, that's hard to say. I've been a sole proprietor for 44 years. I do everything myself, by myself. I've never had mass production. I've never had help. It's hard to say on a regular 4-stop accordion. You know, I do some now, some parts now, some things later. Probably Larry Miller could give me a better idea of the time. I really never tried to figure out how much it takes for one. But I know one thing, to make this accordion here, I could make 2 singles by the time that I make at least one of these. Very, very time consuming. And I think what most people try to do, you try to make a lot of parts at one time. So you don't, if you got your jig set up for the fingerboard, you try to make a bunch of those. If you have the jig set up for the frames or the bass box side, you try to make a lot of those, and then therefore, when you go to put it together, it's a matter of cosmetics as far as paint, stain, or whatever else you want to do to it. It's very hard to say. I could not give you a time limit.
So there's definitely violin making and other violin making. For my part, what interests me is doing things the very traditional way. So you'll see pretty much only hand tools in my shop. I do have a bandsaw and a drill press, but I've also got the egg beater drill, and I'm about to. I bought a kit to assemble for an old frame saw to kind of replace the bandsaw in some instances. But even though these instruments are handmade, you'll hear stories of like traditional making in France, for example, that was very speedy work and sometimes specialized. From what I understand, around the turn of the 19th century, it was common to make 2 instruments in the white, meaning before varnish, in about a week in some shops. And the guy who was telling me the story said there was one gentleman who was a young hotshot who could make 3 in a week, and another one in the shop who could only make 1 a week, but he had lost his arm in the First World War, so he was kind of... So, for most part, that isn't how it's done these days, except for in China, of course, which supplies most of the world, and that's just how it is now. It was other places before where labor was cheap that supplied lots of especially student-level instruments. Myself, because the process is so time-consuming, if you're doing literally everything from, occasionally even splitting the blocks of wood, I take the fastest I've built an instrument in the white is a month, but I have to be very particular about my work. I can't just build a violin. I have to try to build, or I want to try to build my best instrument every time. And the instrument I have exhibited at the A. Hayes building, which y'all should check out during festival, has our work. The varnish process took like at least 2 months just because I antiqued it to make it look old, and I was going for a very specific look and style modeled after, previous exemplary work in my field.
I guess that would make me the speed demon out of the group. Nowadays, one of my triangles, it's rare that I work on one start to finish at one time. I usually go in batches. I'll do the kind of finial work one day, and I usually work in batches anywhere from 3 to 6 at a time. The next day I will turn them all and also do the finishing process that day, and I finish them with beeswax. I use old traditional methods back here, so not putting a lot of polyurethane and stuff on them like you'll see a lot of new like metalsmiths and machinists today. When they finish metal, they'll put stuff that definitely works better, but I'm not allowed to use it here. So, but anyway, yeah, so start to finish, if I were to work on just one, it would be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. That's it. My record that I did was I made 21 in 4 days. One day here we had a festival coming up, and I was trying to make a bunch to try to sell, and came here Tuesday through a Friday and knocked out 21 of them. So I was kind of proud of myself there. So.
I think before we talk too much longer, maybe we should at least hear some of this stuff. I know Joel didn't bring one of your violins.
You had one job, Joel. Come on.
But maybe Jay and Randy can give us some examples of what these things sound like.
I'll go first because I don't want to have to follow that amazing instrument. So, here, if you want to hold this, Joel. I guess I should say. So the first one I'm going to play, when I started making T-Fairs, of course, everyone says, oh, you know, use the hay rake tines and this and that. And I don't live near an old field where one's sitting out there. There is one by the forge here, but I think Dr. Shermy and the rest of the people in the office would be a little mad if I started going out there and ripping off the tines. So almost all of mine are made from cold rolled steel. I have made a few hay rake tine T-Fairs. Those take me about a day just for one because I have to flatten it out. I have about a 5-inch vise, and so I don't have a power hammer or anything to stretch it out, and everything has to be done by hand, so it takes me a while to do those. But these are all the steel ones that I make, and I'll start with the 3/8-inch one, which is the thickness, almost the thickness of the traditional hay rake tine ones. When I started making them, I then realized I had to jump up a level of thickness to 1/2-inch thick to get that hay rake tine sound. So the second one I play will sound a lot more like a traditional T-Fair, and it's a 1/2-inch thick. And the third one is, I just started making really big ones just to kind of goof around one day, so that one will sound really loud. So if you can hold the mic. So this is that was the 3/8. This is the 1/2-inch. And this is the one that I just made for, you know, whatever. So it's got almost more of a dinner bell sound than that one, but I make these more for kind of the decorative side of things, so.
All right, made me hungry with the dinner bell. Mr. Falcone, would you like to?
I want to say something about this triangle. When Dewey Balfour was playing music, there was a club between Morse and Gato called the Town and Country Club. And some people call it Riceville, some people call it Chickatown, whatever. Well, he had this guy from Iota that loved to play the triangle. And he'd go over there and he'd play with the band. They wouldn't pay him anything. And he would just play. They'd buy him some beer, you know, and he'd just play the triangle. But he really got kind of upset. This is a true story. He really got kind of upset because they didn't want to let him take the triangle and put it by a microphone. You know, he couldn't hear himself because, you know, the guitar, the steel, the accordion, the bass, the drums, and also the people, crowd, you know, making so much noise. So one Saturday night, he shows up with his own triangle. He had it in a box about that big, and he had a snap on it. He opened it up. He went to the local junkyard, and he got the coil spring off of a car, and he brought it to Brahma Machine Shop in Crowley, and he had it straightened, and then they curved it, and they curved it, and they curved it. And for the little triangles, what do you call it? Yeah, what do you call that? Another part of that same coil spring from a car was about this long, and that's what he used. Glang, glang.
If I hit this one just right, I can probably rip.
Oh, man. Needless to say, Dewey Balfour was not happy. So he politely told him to put the triangle up and get off of the stage. Well, he didn't want to do that. So every club, at least at that time, had a floor bouncer. So now you know the rest of the story. True story. I'll play you one song on here. As I said, this thing plays in 3 different keys. It's very unique. I don't know of anyone at all that has ever made this particular accordion. At the beginning of a Cajun dance, they would play the theme song, usually a fast song, and then they would play a waltz. And this was really usually Chateautoit was the waltz. And actually what it was for, to make sure that everybody was sounding right. Someone wasn't too loud, someone wasn't loud enough, and hopefully the sound was balanced. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of Shatatut in all three keys.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time, so I'm going to check my, not checking messages, I'm just checking my time. But that last key was E, I think he said. C, D, and E, is that right? C, D, and E? C, D, and E. I mean, clearly, I think one of my questions was, are you a player of these instruments? And was it playing the instrument that got you into building, or was it building that turned you on to playing? But I think we've kind of already gone through that. Is there something about your instruments, or is there a particular instrument that you've made that you're particularly proud of, or that makes your instruments distinctive? I think we already know some of the things that a Falcon accordion has that makes it distinctive and unique and important. But I think even for Joel and for Jay, there might be something that another musician picked up and said, "Hey, this sounds great," or something like that. Anything that really stands out for you?
I might have to think about that. I can answer that. So kind of two parts on there. The thing about the instrument that feels special to me now, like I said, I use mostly cold rolled steel for mine. It's easier to get for me and this and that. But I've made a few hay rake tine traditional T-Fairs. And using those is really unique. Not only do you have the sense of reusing something that was kind of discarded or put aside. So you have that nice little feeling of, what do they call it, upcycling now? It's the trendy term. But also, I'm a historian, and I'm not much for, the spiritual side of things, but at the same time, when I hold an artifact or something from 100, 200, long time ago, I feel like a little bit of a kinship with whoever had that before. The cool thing about using hay rakes for T-Fairs is that you're completely repurposing this for a totally different use, whereas a hay rake tine would have been used to do farm work, to raise animals that you might have fed yourself with, feeding the body, but then you use it. Some of this metal is 100, 120 years old, and you reuse this to make a musical instrument that, whereas the farmer fed the body, the music kind of feeds the soul. I think any musician or any fan of music, especially Cajun and Creole music down here in Louisiana, might agree with that. It feels a really kind of a fun thing, and that ties into the second part where the first time, like I said, my first triangle I made took me about 2.5 days to make. I kept heating it and cooling it and working on it and finding all these little imperfections in it, which anyone who makes things will tell you will always find imperfections, no matter how hard you try to ignore them. And so I didn't think much of it, thought of it on a whim to run home, grab it at my house, run back to Blue Moon, and hand it to Ashley before the show. And I figured she would maybe play it for one song, just humor me. She played it for most of the set, and I had a smile from ear to ear, and it felt really to see someone take something that you took from raw materials and turn it into music. It was really interesting. I always say I make them better than I play them, and whatever your opinion of mine are, I can tell you the playing is not good. So I prefer listening to people play mine. So there you go. Joel?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I make instruments because playing them is too hard. And one of Jay's favorite, one of the favorite things I've heard Jay say was when a mutual friend of ours asked him if he would ever get into knife making. He responded, "I'm more of a beating swords into plows guy." And there's definitely that spirit that I like to bring to my, well, I don't know if I'm bringing it, but I think about it with my work. Music has an amazing, it's an amazing means to really unify people, and it can be used very responsibly that way. I guess it can be extremely powerful. If you look, ranging from Beethoven's Ninth that proclaims joy to everyone, to songs used by the civil rights movement. It's even if it touches on our anti-war songs or just our patriotic songs, it can do things that other things can't, because people get songs stuck in their head and they love to sing them, I guess. Aside from that, I'm happiest with my work when, I love the research and understanding that I do to inform my work as much as my work. I'm happiest when I learn about a new technique or tool that was used by the old masters, and it's like something that I can bring into my work and figure out. And my work is a mystery to me as well. In the end, I'm just making a fiddle, and I can't pretend that I know what is going to exactly come out as. I know it'll sound like a fiddle or a violin. I usually compare it to people's voices. They're individual, yet they're collectively, you recognize someone speaking when you hear that.
I'd like to recognize someone in the crowd that I've known for at least 40 years, Mr. Gerald Wayne Broussard, alias T-Boy. He was a steel player on the famous song with Cammie Doucette, "Hey Mom, I'm Still Your Little Boy." And his dad, stand up, and his dad played the fiddle, very popular song. A lot of people come up to me, I'm 67, and they say, "Hey, you old something, you still making accordions?" I said, "Yeah." And, "Well, did you teach anybody how to make accordions?" And I said, "Yes, I have two people. One of them you may have heard of. His name is Andre Michaud. He plays the accordion with the Lost Bayou Ramblers. Very good player, good guy. And another gentleman, I have three sons. One is my real son, one is my son-in-law, and one is my adopted son. His name is Rusty Santur. He's not a Cajun, not from here, originally from Baton Rouge, virtually unknown. He's been making accordions for probably 7, 8 years now. He's married to Tammy Lynn's daughter, the singer, and very fine gentleman. I have him here today, and I would like for you to listen to him play an accordion. I wish Andre was here, but he's not. This guy is self-taught. He is, to me, one of the best accordion players I have ever seen in the 45 years that I've been in this business. And there may be someone who can play as good as him, but I promise you, there's no one who can play better. Come on, Rusty. Give him a hand. I want you to play a two-step, but the bass matches, not, not like not. Huh? That's good.
I think so. I drove it a few times. Wow. Thank you for that.
School teachers don't lie, do they?
I hope I can live up to the expectation you just set.
No doubt. But you're gonna do it in pair dance, two-step. Who says he's not a Cajun? Speaks no French. What you want, D? Whatever. That's good. That's good. You know, being a school teacher, I like to have good students like that. Give him a hand, man.
We can talk all we want, but when you hear it played, it's hard not to dance. I think what we'll do now is open the floor up for questions. If you have questions for any of these guys, I ask that you raise your hand and wait for me to come to you with the mic. So I'm going to go down the stairs over here so I don't jump. Questions? Let's see. I saw you back there, but I'm going to go over here first since it's on the way.
Making a violin, what kind of wood do you use and what kind of glue? And what makes a Stradivarius so Cadillac?
Yes. So you can make a violin out of almost anything. There's a Formica one on display. Was it Formica? Yeah. What's typically was used in Europe was curly or flamed maple and a top of spruce. Spruce is a great acoustic wood, of course. It's used on guitar tops often as well, and piano soundboards. A violin, if you have to define it, would be, and violin and fiddle are interchangeable, the most popular question of the field. They're built the same way, they have all the same parts. But so the definition would be something along the lines of a four-string instrument played with a bow in a certain range of pitches. So that leaves a lot of freedom for how you want to do it. And if you look to older instruments back in the day, you'll see a lot of variety. Now it's very standardized because the player wants to know what to expect when they get their instrument. What was the other question? Oh, you use a animal hide glue. That's an awesome glue. And Stradivarius was an exceptional craftsman. What I marvel at is that he definitely had an idea of how he wanted his instruments to come out before he put his knife to the wood or anything. So you can see a deliberate thoughts in his work because it's all, got that. It all shows what he was going for. He wasn't wishy-washy at all. He worked for a very long time, and he was amazingly consistent with what he put out. And so he was appreciated as doing excellent work early on. There were other people before him, notably Jacob Steiner, who was who was preferred for a while among musicians, but eventually Stradivari was recognized and he set the bar, and everybody's been kind of trying to measure up since then.
Okay, we have a question back here.
For Mr. Pault, how long is violin school? And for Mr. Steiner, when you build the T-Fair, are you going for a certain note, or is it a sound?
So the program I attended was 3 years, although there are other ones in the country that are 2 years. And there's even nice workshops you can go to, held during the summertime that accept first timers. That'll run for like a week or two. Just be prepared to buy a bunch of tools that you won't use for anything else, is all I gotta say.
And as for notes and stuff from T-Fair, you're really looking for a good full sound. I've actually taken out a little chromatic tuner and tested them, and they kind of come out all over the spectrum. I kind of did all this self-taught, learning by burning, as I say back there. A lot of scars, but you learn over time what works and what doesn't. Certain things I will do to kind of the end for some decoration. Of course, I went into it thinking, if they don't sound good, at least they'll look good. And that's what I was going for a while. And then I realized you hit a wall there. If you do too much, you will kill the sound. So you back up a little bit. And then I did really simple ones for a while. And then once they all started sounding the same, I realized I'm not gaining any more out of the sound, and I'm losing the fun of making them aesthetically pleasing, as they would say. So I kind of found that happy medium, and there's a metaphor somewhere in there. So
Everything in moderation.
Yep. I'd like to add something to what he said. Sometimes experience and trial and error is the thing that you need to have. For the first 8, 10, 12 years, I can tell you, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd have an accordion. It may have been a 6. The next one might have been a 4. The one after that might have been an 8. And it took me many years to figure out different differentiation of reeds have different power, thickness of reed blocks, type of bellows. So many factors are involved in just even a regular 4-stop accordion. And I guess in the last 20 years, I finally have gotten what I call a formula to where hopefully everyone comes out between 8, 9, and 10. Musical instruments are strange. Cosmetics, beauty is one thing. A bass player, guitar player goes into a music store, and you're gonna see, maybe fiddles too, I don't know. You're gonna see 10 to 12 bass guitars. You're gonna see a bunch of guitars, regular guitars. And the real musician who is looking for sound, who is looking for efficiency on that instrument. I could never make a violin. I tried one time. I tried to play. I sounded like 2 cats under a house in heat. It's terrible. And if I made a violin and I didn't know how to play the violin, how could I know how the sound post, that's something inside, is supposed to be, how the bridge is supposed to be, the height of a 1/16 of an inch difference can make such a different sound on that bridge. Or let's say the neck itself, if the strings are too far from the actual neck. I don't know any of that. And I think it's the 2 guys that, again, that are my apprentices, they both play very well, so they have an easier time of understanding, where I'm coming from, because they know how to play, they know what they're looking for, they know the sound that's in their mind. And if they can't get that sound, different reeds are going to produce different sounds. If they can't get that particular sound, they don't want the instrument. Some are very, very particular, and I have to cater to individuals. Everybody is different. Everybody wants something different. So in his case, totally different thing with a piece of iron, and also, but in his case, especially the fiddle, man, I praise anyone who can make a fiddle and play a fiddle. If you can play a fiddle, you can play anything in the world. I guarantee you. And again, my thing again, I'm gonna say is that trial and error. I've wasted a lot of wood. I've wasted a lot of time through my life in doing this. And again, in the last, hopefully 15, 20 years, I've developed a pattern that seems to work for me. It may not work for another accordion maker, but this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I found. And the people who come to me are looking for the same thing, or I have a lot of very good Cajun players, customers. And if I couldn't produce what they wanted, they wouldn't come to me. And it corresponds for the same thing these guys do.
Okay, we have a question over here with Dr. DeWitt.
At UL now, we have this traditional music program, as I mentioned, which is doing something that you don't normally see at a university, which is teaching people how to play music that's not written down, music in oral tradition. And the university, in its wisdom, allows me to hire musicians from the community who aren't necessarily college educated to the level that you would normally need to teach at a university. So this is a great thing. This made me just start to wondering, well, could we also teach instrument making at the university? I know that, Joel, you didn't mention the Indiana University program, so that where Anya learned her luthier program, which she spent, I think, 2 years studying how to make violins over there. So that's at least one university that's got some kind of instrument making, because we have, at UL we have industrial design, we have an architecture program, we have sculpture, we have industrial technology. So it seems like maybe we have the kinds of things that you, so my question to you guys is that a crazy idea? Or would you see certain advantages in that? Having a university program, or even just a separate school outside the university, school of instrument making, that people from other parts of the country could come to to Lafayette to learn how to make instruments?
Before I answer that, I'll add one question, point about what my comrades are saying. The worst thing you want, well, first of all, there's lots of variables in our work. Jay was talking about the size of his tines and the baton and the materials he makes, and of course the reeds and wood and bridge, strings you put on it. But the worst thing you want as a musical instrument maker is someone to try your instrument in a dead room that doesn't resonate, because it's so many factors out there that affect the sound, and then each person has their own taste to some degree. I mean, once you reach a certain level, you start agreeing about what's a good sound, but it's always something very particular. So that's one thing I think is very interesting about what we do. As for the school program, I think that's an awesome idea. I don't see any negatives, because people can always, learn from their uncle that makes fiddles, like Buddy Ortego did with his uncle, Abner Ortego. It doesn't stop them from doing it on their own anyway, so you wouldn't be killing that tradition. You could actually add a lot of study, or rather, a lot of more interesting information about how these handmade traditions might like their place among other handmade instrument making traditions. And I learned, you come out of, I went to a 3-year school program, and it's amazing how it's just the tip of the iceberg. So you learn how to sharpen pretty well, but I've definitely gotten better with sharpening my tools since then. You're training your eye a lot, things you never could see before that people have been pointing out at you over and over again, like, look at this, and you're just like, ah. So it's a great place to start, and it's a fairly necessary place to start these days, because you have to get all the advantages you can to and figure out what you're doing as soon as possible if this is something you want to do more than once. Okay.
I want to add something. Whatever type of instrument that you make, you really, really have to have a passion for it. You really have to want to do this, and don't expect to get rich. I promise you. It's one of those things that it's very tedious, but it's also very satisfying. I don't know. I know there's about 40, I think I said that a while ago, 40 accordion makers between Houston and New Orleans. And some you hear about, some you don't. But you really have to want to do this.
So I was going to make a point about the school program. I will agree with Joel that that'd be a great idea, mainly because I think what ensures the survival of a music, especially when you have a culture as unique as Cajun Creole music culture down here, is allowing influences to come in there to take those in different directions. There's a school of thought that says, you have to keep it in a vacuum-sealed container culturally. You try to play music in a vacuum, you don't get sound. So, and I think I'm trying to force a metaphor there, but that's what it is. I think when, by all means, record it, preserve it that way. But if you play the same 30 songs over and over again for the next 70 years, nothing's going to change and it's going to be lost. The reason why you see the longevity of Cajun Creole music is that it's changed so much. Even the stuff that people today call traditional Cajun music is it was groundbreaking 50 years ago and 60 years ago from what was there before. So, and the same goes for instruments. By expanding the number of people who are making them, we put in as much of ourselves into the instruments as much as we are trying to copy and replicate and do homage to what came before us. It's a mixture of those two. So the one way to ensure its survival is by not just preserving the playing of the music, but the making of the things that make that music. So,
one quick thing I wanted to add: there's first of all, people across the country and the world love our local flavor down here. So I feel like we should do that. And second, if you don't do it, someone else starts doing it and telling you how it is. So you go across the country and they only know the New Orleans Mardi Gras, and you're trying to explain the one that's ancient that we practice down here. So if we don't talk about our tradition of instrument making and do our own work ourselves, other people will. And so, we have a ton of instrument makers down here. We got the people.
I don't have anything to say.
So we're running up against time, but we have one last question.
So, Mr. Falcone, I think it's great that you have your sons doing the apprenticeship so that they learn from you that you've now perfected making the accordions. I'm curious as to if Rusty is your son, your adopted son as a term of endearment, or if legally, and how he came to be interested in the accordion.
Well, I've known Rusty for about 24 years, and he moved down from Baton Rouge. He works for a Greco generator company, and his daddy worked for the same company. That's offshore generator work. And he came down here, and he was interested in wanting to learn how to play the accordion. And I didn't know him. I was on his list of two people that he wanted to buy an accordion with. And I think what influenced him more was the fact that I had just come out with this double accordion, and Wayne Toops played it. Wayne Toops was pretty influential in my business, obviously, and he decided to come buy an accordion with me. First time I saw him play was at Como High School gym for a talent contest, and he was in the 8th grade. And we just became very good friends through the years. Actually, we became family about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I told you that his mother-in-law was Tammy Lynn, famous country singer, River Road, I forget the other band's name. And somehow or other, his wife, Nikki, was at a wedding with my wife's family. And Nikki, Rusty's wife, had a sister named, I'm losing it. Yeah, anyway, so they met up with my wife's nephew. Well, guess what? They got married. So now Rusty and his wife, we call them in the family. In fact, Rusty's daddy used to tease him all the time because we were such good friends, and he told him when he was fixing to get married to Nikki, and then his sister-in-law married my wife's nephew. His dad said, "You always wanted to be in that family, didn't you?" So that's why I call him my adopted son. I have 3 sons, really. And long story, but we've been good friends, and we just have a good relationship. And Andre Michaud, the same way. He really wanted to learn. He learned how to play the accordion from Ray Apsher. Ray Apsher, Wayne Toops, and myself, we all learned every Saturday morning at the jam at Shine Mouton's shop. We didn't miss it at all. It was a religious situation that we went to the jam on Saturday morning. We ate boudin, drank beer. Sometimes we had to carry people out of there. But we all learned through trial and error of watching each other play. And I tell everybody that's the best way to learn. A lot of times people say, well, you can go through a step, and a diatonic accordion is just like a harmonica. It plays the same way. There's a lot of saying that if you play a harmonica, you can play the accordion. If you play the accordion, you can play the harmonica. But it's by contact with individuals. And I know in these jam sessions, let's say I was trying to learn to play the back door, Porte de Nadia. Well, I might have played it one way, and then somebody else, man, he played it a different way, which sounded a lot better. And so I try to take that style, try to add to what I could do. And that's the best way to learn how to accordion. They've got a lot of jam sessions going on now today. They all do it with a C accordion. If you bring a D, a B flat, a E, or an F, you won't get to play. I'll tell you right.
All right, how about a big round of applause for our panelists? Thank you for being here. Listen, I want to make sure we're going to take a little break, but at noon there's going to be a special presentation that I want to make sure everyone is here for, and then after that we'll have a lunch. So make sure you're back here for 12 o'clock on the dot. Thank you.
I want to I'm John Sharp. Most people call me PUD. I work at the Center for Louisiana Studies, which is one of the groups that put this symposium on today. And I wanted to introduce you to the Louisiana, our state folklorist, who's here with us to talk a little bit about an ongoing project, and that is Maida Owens.
Thank you. It just so happens that at the state level, we're having a project that's focusing on musical instruments. It's just getting started. This year was the inventory phase, where we hired 2 people to identify all the instrument makers in the state, all instruments, including things like specialized amps and things, the makers. So that inventory is finished. And from that, we're going to produce a couple of different things. One, we're going to contract with people to go out and interview some of the instrument makers. There's way more than we ever thought. There's really a lot going on in the state when you include all the instruments. And then they will, based on their interviews, they'll write an essay and we'll put it on our website, the LouisianaFolklife.org. I have these little bookmarks in the back if you want one. Because that is a repository of a lot of the research about Louisiana folk traditions. The second thing we're doing is producing a map. And any of the instrument makers who want to be found will be able to have a listing on the map, and that'll be on our website also. But these are still in infancy. It's going to take a couple of years to do everything. But I'm really excited about it. And then the other thing is we want to have gatherings around the state based on either geographic interest or instruments, and help the instrument builders, makers, and repairers, by the way, network. And so how could we support the different segments of the musical instrument world in order to further their interest? So that's all coming down in the next couple of years.
So the next portion is an award. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but the October is Folklife month, and this is the third year? This is the third year that the Lieutenant Governor's office has proclaimed October to be Folklife month in the state. And part of that, and the reason that we're talking about it now, is that we get to choose a tradition bearer for each of the regions to be awarded and recognized for their years of service. Maybe we say a little bit more about the Folklife Month?
Yeah, this is an idea that came out of the Louisiana Folklife Commission. That's a governor-appointed body that advises the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and others agencies too. This is a collaboration with the Louisiana Folklore Society, where 5 or 6 ambassadors select a tradition bearer that they want to honor, and at some kind of public presentation. And you are at one of those.
And so now there's a little part that we need to do to tell you where all this comes from and how this works. It's paying the bills. Supported by the Louisiana Division of the Arts and Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. Funding's also been provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, Artworks, and the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, in collaboration with the Louisiana Folklife Commission. Did I miss anybody, Maida? Okay, great. So, as you may guess, because Mr. Randy Falcone is standing right here with us today, he is receiving the award as the Louisiana Tradition Bearer. And one of the reasons that I thought that he was a great person to receive this award, because not only have you you made your first accordion 1973. And he mentioned earlier, and you may have been here to hear that he was surprised that he became an accordion maker, because he's a rock and roll fan, and to that end, sometimes when I happen to be in Rayne, Louisiana, I go to No Name Music Store, which is a record store, and Randy and I have run into each other there, going through all those old records. But not only has Randy from a diverse background and musically, he didn't do what everybody else did. He decided that, there was something that could be done, something different that could happen. And it's important to remember in folk life that even though there is a historical pattern and a thing that exists, that this is a living tradition. So things that are changing even now today. So that's why I thought Randy was a great person. So on behalf of the Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungester, I want to recognize Mr. Randy Falcone as a Louisiana Tradition Bearer for his commitment to sustaining the distinct culture of the state and contributing to its rich diversity of living tradition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words?
Believe it or not, I'm pretty shy. I'm not one to stand out and let people know, look what I did, That's why I was very touched when I was told that I would receive this award. Going back to the music, it was also Fats Domino. When we were in high school, I got some friends that were there. We used to listen to that all the time. If someone would have told me that I would be doing this for 44 years, I wouldn't have believed it. And as I said earlier, you have to want to do this. You have to like it. It becomes a part of you, just like anything else. Similar to a sport, someone who likes golf, they'll never quit until they have to. And I thank all of you for coming. I thank all of my customers that supported me through the 44 years, and I'm just very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.